from WFRB-TV Local 5, your local election headquarters. This is Newsmaker Sunday with your host, Tom Zalaski.
Good morning. Welcome to Newsmaker Sunday. I'm Tom Zalaski. We continue our conversation with the two top Republican candidates for the United States Senate. Last week it was Leah Vukmir. Today we talk with Kevin Nicholson. He served 2 tours in both Iraq and Afghanistan as a Marine Corps officer, received a Bronze Star for his work on a counter-improvised explosive device team in Afghanistan. After his military service, Mr. Nicholson achieved master's degrees in business and public administration from Harvard. He's a husband, a father of 3, calls Delafield community his home, and Kevin Nicholson joins us this morning for Newsmaker Sunday. Kevin, thanks so much for joining us. Much appreciated.
Tom, thanks for having me.
Beside the synopsis we just gave about you, a little bit more about yourself, your background.
Sure. Well, I mean, you heard the bulk of it, but I mean, between being a husband, a father, a businessman, and a Marine Corps veteran, I mean, that's what's made me who I am today. I mean, it's carved me out to be a conservative who understands the problems that we face, and frankly, most of my adult life has been spent solving problems, whether in the military or business. I have to deal with the world as it is, and I have to actually produce results, or I don't get to keep my job. And really, that is the attitude that's missing from the professional political class in Washington. They have no ability to solve the problems we have with either overspending, or you look at foreign relations, or whatever the case might be. They roll problems from election cycle to election cycle without ever actually solving them. This is the reason I've limited myself to 2 terms. I don't think you should do this as a career. I think you should go for a short period of time, solve problems, and then move on to the next step of your life.
Let me take you back to your earliest maybe campaign commercial, where you likened yourself to Ronald Reagan when he switched parties. What did you see when you switched parties? What didn't you like? What was going on at the time?
Sure. Well, first let me say on those commercials, those don't actually come from our campaign. They were run by another group. I only point that out so that everyone understands. We appreciate the help, but we actually can't control that message. But, I mean, the reality is, much like President Reagan, much like President Trump, much like Vice President Pence, much like so many former Democrats that grow up and see the world and come to realize that conservatism has the answers and the better policies that actually unlock prosperity for people, that was the case with me. When I was a Democrat, especially involved in 1999 and 2000, I saw a Democrat Party which was obsessed with separating people by race, class, gender, ethnicity, you name it, but finding ways to divide Americans and not actually solve problems. And so I left politics, largely frustrated with what I saw in the Democrats, and then moved on in a different direction. I went from there. I ran a newspaper for a while. I worked as a cowboy at a small cattle ranch in Wyoming because that's what you do after you run a newspaper, or so I thought when I was in my early 20s. Made sense at the time in my linear career path. But from there I went on, joined the Marine Corps. I fought in Iraq. I fought in Afghanistan. Along the way I got married and I had kids. And boy, that's a lot of reality hitting you in the face. And it stripped away my illusions as a young person, which I'll say this to young people today in our state. Look, it is not enough to consign your morality to a political party and say, well, I'm a good person because I feel like I can express it by voting for Democrats. Well, the reality is Democrat policies don't make people more successful, more prosperous, or more secure. Look at Tammy Baldwin. She's all for overspending and indebting future generations and current generations in a way that's not sustainable. She supports policies like the Iran deal, which ultimately give billions of dollars in cash to state sponsors of terrors that frankly imperil the future of the American Republic. That's not okay, and those aren't policies that work for people.
On the campaign trail, you know very well the Marquette Law School poll that recently came out. You and Leah Vukmir are having difficulty right now as far as name recognition. How are you getting around that?
Well, I mean, first I'd say there's been 9 polls released on the primary. We've been winning in 8 of them. So we're winning the primary, which is great. And it's good momentum, but, we need to keep doing what we're doing. Second, I'd be very worried if I were Senator Baldwin. I mean, really what those numbers show is she's already spent nearly $3.5 million on TV to try and reintroduce herself to the people of the state of Wisconsin. And here she is sitting with a 41% approval rating and a 43% disapproval rating and a less than 50% of the ballot share. These are all terrible numbers for an incumbent senator. She's in a lot of trouble, and she's going to have a very, very difficult time making the case to the people of the state of Wisconsin that in any way, shape, or form she should be given another term. My argument is going to be all the way through November, because we're going to win in August, that it's going to take an outsider not just to beat Tammy Baldwin, but more important, to create a country that actually embraces the principles that it was founded upon, which means your rights are given to you by God, they're guaranteed, no government gets to interfere with them, and ultimately that's what unlocks future and prosperity for people, allows them to go forward and be successful. I know that this message carried to every corner of this state, to include places that don't always vote for Republicans, is going to work. And I know that Senator Baldwin has no comeback to that in any way, shape, or form says that she is positioned to actually help make people more secure, more prosperous, and more successful. That's why we're going to beat her in November.
You say you're ahead in the polls, 8 of 9 polls, yet you didn't
in the primary polls.
In the primary polls.
Yep.
But you didn't receive the Republican Party's endorsement at the convention. What happened there?
Well, look, I'm the outside candidate. You know, my primary opponent had made it perfectly clear, and continues to, that she is very much the insider establishment candidate. And I give her that. You know what? And I say this, that if at the end of the day you look at Congress and you feel like Congress is doing a pretty bang-up job and they're right on point, you want them to keep doing what they're doing, you probably should not vote for me in this election. You have a choice in the primary, which I think has made it clear she is of the establishment, and she will remain of the establishment, and the establishment is fully embracing her. Now, for the other, 90-some% of us that look at Congress and see the tangled mess that it is, look, I am an outsider candidate, and my life has been spent solving problems, whether in the military or whether in the private sector. I look and I realize we are far more than $20 trillion in debt. That is a number that's thrown out there very often. It's still problematic, but we are far more than $20 trillion in debt. If we're honest about our long-term obligations, I look at North Korea, I look at Iran, two places where the professional political class got us into problems, never really provided a solution as to what we could do about it. In fact, said to the American people, you have to deal with the mistakes that we made in both in Iran and North Korea. But now here comes an outsider in the White House today, which is actually pushing back on those mistakes. And John Bolton, who endorsed my campaign, is helping the president to push back on these mistakes and actually create a more secure and prosperous future. Now, again, all that comes from outsiders that are willing to look at things differently. This is true of Ron Johnson. It's true of Ted Cruz and Mike Lee. Ted Cruz and Mike Lee both endorsed my campaign. Because they are people that didn't previously hold elected office, went straight to the Senate, are willing to hold people accountable, solve problems, and then ultimately, if they lose a re-election, so be it. That's life. The real issue is, are we going to put the country on a better trajectory? Tammy Baldwin isn't. Nobody from the political establishment is going to do anything different. Every one of your viewers already knows this. They're sick of, wringing their hair and looking at this thing and trying to figure out what are we going to do different. Send different people, and you'll get a different result.
We continue with Senate candidate Kevin Nicholson right after this, so please stay with us.